nuestra próxima charla viene Jackie Balzer, que es la head of front-end developer at Behance. She's been working at Behance for over 8 years. She's originally from Florida, lives in New York. It's very important that you know that she likes collecting floaties and like floating on lakes. You know, the ones that you've seen on Instagram, like the bagel, the donut, the flamingo. So, you know, hit up Jackie with any recommendations for that. And without further ado, let's give a big round of applause to Jackie Balzer, everyone.
Excellent. Hi, everyone. Yeah, just to clarify, floating on an inflatable pizza slice is probably one of life's greatest joys, so I highly recommend it. Hi, I'm Jackie, head of front-end development at Behance, which is part of Adobe. You can reach me at any point on Twitter at JackieBackwards, just sort of a tricky username to try and communicate out loud. So today I'm going to tell you about Behance's journey growing and maintaining a large code base in an era where front-end technology is advancing and changing extremely fast. I'll cover some of our trials and tribulations, our growing pains, and I will even air some of our lingering dirty laundry, but perhaps most importantly, how I learned to stop worrying and love the website. So the front-end web development ecosystem is moving insanely fast these days, as I'm sure everyone knows. It seems like a new tool or methodology for authoring HTML, CSS, and JavaScript is becoming available almost every single day. Whereas a few years ago, there weren't nearly as many tools with which to work on these things, probably in large part because complex front-end requirements like responsive web development or single-page web apps weren't concerns anywhere near our radar at the time. But now, we're seeing these huge, rapid advancements in everything from the languages themselves to how we generate basically every type of code that we write, to the frameworks that we use to organize our code, all the way to the build tools that we use to compile, optimize, and serve our code. And because there is always some better or faster tool becoming available, it can feel kind of overwhelming to have to always choose and adopt the best new technology all the time. Now, I think this is hard enough to do as a seasoned developer that's working on a brand new project and that has no pre-existing code considerations. But what if you're working in a large code base, or a code base or a product that's existed for a really long time, where the moment when you add something new, now everything that you already have suddenly becomes legacy code, and now you have multiple sets of code that you have to document and understand and maintain and teach to others? Or what if you're someone new to development and you're just trying to pick a language or a framework to start out with? How do you even know where to look or where to go? So when you compound these technical challenges with this negative industry pressure that you should be using certain tools or doing things a certain way in order to be a real developer, it can create kind of a harsh environment for being able to make the best decisions for yourself, for your team, for your product, and for your users, which on the code side can lead to things like increased technical debt or missed project deadlines, and perhaps more importantly, on the human side, can lead to negative things like a feeling of imposter syndrome or burnout. So, of course, it's super easy to compare our work to others, especially in an era where social media fosters so much information overload. We see other websites or we hear other people's opinions about the best way to do things. It's easy to think like, oh, that's better than mine, or my website will never be that good, or I'm not using that tool. Does that mean I'm doing it wrong? But making this kind of comparison is kind of like comparing your life to someone's Instagram life. You know, it's unrealistic to compare your reality to someone else's highly curated projection. You have way too much information about your situation and definitely not enough information about theirs. So today I want to pull back the curtain on Behance's Instagram life, as it were, and show you the real side of our team's web development journey through the years and how we've dealt with all of these different challenges through the time. So if you feel like you've ever experienced these challenges or anything like them or might ever experience them, I want you to know that it's okay and you are not alone. So this is Behance today. We've been evolving its code base since 2010. So when I joined 8 years ago, they had just finished a wholesale rewrite of the website from scratch. But since then, we've been working within that same one evolving code base, moving through lots of different templating engines and CSS preprocessors and tons of JavaScript libraries and frameworks, and of course, many evolutions of the look and feel of the design of the website as well. So I joined as the 5th developer, and we've grown to about 40 people on the dev team. And in that time, we've dealt with a pretty wide variety of challenges. We're constantly considering which new technologies can serve us and the website and our users' needs the best. We've had to figure out how to integrate new technology into old, even when there have been massive functional disparities. We've had to determine when to actually start implementing these things, having to balance our product goals and roadmaps with our developer happiness and the health of the code base. And of course, we've had to figure out how to clean up any messes that we left behind along the way. So, of course, there's a lot of opinions out there on what the best or the right way to build a website is. I'm not here to tell you that there is any one right or wrong way to do any of these things. In fact, I'm kind of here to demonstrate the exact opposite. What I do want to do is tell you about how we've handled these challenges and why we've made the decisions that we did and how they did or didn't work out for us. And kind of reveal that no matter how pretty and put together things may look on the outside, the reality is that when you pull back the curtain, no website or process is ever really as perfect as it may seem. So first, a little extra insight into Behance's size and complexity. If you're not familiar with the website, it is a platform for showcasing and discovering creative work, which means that creatives can come to our website and they can upload all sorts of different types of media, from images to video to audio to text, and then we display their work and make it easy to be discovered through a variety of ways. So, for example, your work could be featured on our homepage or displayed in one of our curated galleries, or surface through a feed of content that is automatically generated based on the user's interests. And we have user profiles and team profiles. We have a job list for creative careers. There's an inbox and messaging section. There's even a section where we live stream video. So as of today, I counted over 50 pages on the website, and that's in various states of logged in or out or empty states and whatnot. And that is made up of over 700 JavaScript files, about 500 Sass files, almost 1,000 markup templates, and more recently, around 300 Vue.js files. So it's pretty big. This number has been in flux over the years as we've added and removed various pages and features from the site. But probably most critically, it's also evolved to become more like a web app than a traditional static website, where now we have interactive modular components that exist across many pages of the site. But we have very humble beginnings. So this is what the site looked like when I joined in 2010. And I would say that our JavaScript at the time was very largely jQuery driven. We had no actual JavaScript framework in place. At best, we just kind of had a few utility functions that we could use wherever we needed them. But largely, our JavaScript problems kind of revolved around which jQuery plugins we could use for everything from custom select menu dropdowns to image carousels to even our pop-up dialogues. Not only that, we weren't using anything aside from vanilla CSS to style the website. I would say that our development style could be classified as copy and paste driven development at that point, because we had absolutely no tools on the front end to help reduce repetition. And we weren't really using any methodologies for naming conventions or anything like that. Honestly, I think anything that you see here that isn't a plain text or a solid color was probably an image, because CSS wasn't really powerful enough to do a lot of the fancy stuff that we wanted to do consistently across browsers, and that includes even things like rounded corners and box shadows. But over time, we did start to get more comfortable using CSS features for visual flair where we could, leaning very heavily on lots of vendor prefixes, but understanding that the website didn't have to look exactly the same in every single browser. This is still one of my favorite single-serving websites of all time. And honestly, once the designers learned that we could start doing a lot of their work in the CSS, it was kind of game over. We were vendor prefixing pretty much every cool CSS feature that we could get our hands on. So in time, as browser technology is starting to pick up more steam, CSS as a language is advancing, we're able to start making our website look a little bit more slick and modern using native CSS rather than having our designers creating all these obnoxious little rounded corner images, and of course, unleashing just slews of jQuery plugins around the website for whatever cool UI interaction we thought would be useful. On top of all of that, we had an additional interesting challenge in that we had all of these offshoots of Behance that were themed galleries for different creative fields, as well as these white label sort of miniature Behances for schools and organizations. And all of these use the same markup and styles in JavaScript as the main Behance website, but with an additional style sheet loaded on top of it to customize each one for the look of their brand. Now, all of these lived within the same one massive code base, which of course meant that if you changed something on the main Behance website, you had to go and make sure that you weren't breaking in anything on any of these other 40-plus websites. No big deal. So by now, we had a pretty clear need for a tool that was going to help us with our CSS development. Not only were our vendor prefixes starting to slip through the cracks, but thanks to all of these themed sites and galleries, we were completely inundated with copy and pasted CSS, in particular where the only difference would be things like font names or color values. Additionally, because these white label sites were just pretty similar themes off of the main Behance website, our designers were cranking out designs way faster than we were able to keep up with building them. So fortunately for us, by this time, CSS preprocessors were picking up some steam and were looking like the perfect tools to help us build these sites faster and have to copy and paste way less code. Now, the story I'm about to tell you isn't about the merits of any one CSS preprocessor over another, but I do want to use it as a real-world example to the messy path to choosing and implementing and actually using new tools, which is totally fine, by the way. So for us at the time, we were debating between Less and Sass. They were kind of the most popular ones at the time. Both great tools on their own, but we needed to see which ones were actually going to work best for our specific needs. Less had a really solid offering, but we were really enticed by all of the extra power that Sass was offering. On top of that, Compass was a really popular tools framework that also offered a ton of extra power that was going to be super perfect for all of our theming needs and everything we were doing with changing colors and all of our sprite management. We were super pumped. Sass and Compass were going to change our lives. The answer could not have been more clear. We obviously went with Less. Why would we do that? So in our case, we ended up going with Less for a couple of different reasons. At the time, you could only compile Sass with Ruby, and since Behance was not built on a Ruby stack, it wasn't easy for us to implement or even start experimenting with Sass. Whereas Less could easily be compiled by this really cute little GUI application that you could download to your computer, which meant that it actually had a really low barrier for entry to us. We were a really small dev team still at this point, so it meant that we could start getting the benefits of having any CSS preprocessor much sooner and with way less friction and engineering time than if we had tried to actually implement the full breadth of Sass at that point. And it afforded us another benefit in that we were able to use Less as a proof of concept that implementing a CSS preprocessor was actually a worthwhile investment. The time it took to get it up and running for everyone to use paid off drastically in development time and improvements down the line, which in turn meant that we were able to get team buy-in for actually adopting Sass, as well as negotiate for the development time that we needed to do so, and then ultimately make the switch to the tool that we felt would serve us best. But our journey does not end there. Although we had decided the higher investment in setting up Sass was worth it, we did have to cut some corners to get there. To complicate things, we now had the dreaded technical debt of having a code base that was partially vanilla CSS and partially Less, so we would have to take the time to convert those to Sass. But perhaps most importantly, we still didn't have a tech stack that could compile Sass for us. But what we could do was have everyone install Ruby and Sass on their individual machines, and we could compile the Sass there and commit both the Sass and the compiled CSS to the repository. Now, We violated a lot of web development best practices by compiling CSS on our own machines instead of with a build tool within the stack. Plus, we were committing an even worse crime of actually committing that compiled code to the repository. Now, I highly doubt you'll ever find a medium think piece out there advocating for this kind of implementation, and it gives me some anxiety to admit on stage in front of this many talented engineers that we were committing such egregious violations of best practices by having literally hundreds of compiled CSS files in our repository. But on the flip side, I actually can't overstate how much benefit we were getting by having Sass available to us. For what sounds like a nightmare situation on the surface, I have to say, for the most part, actually worked really well for us. Suddenly, we were able to build those themed galleries and white-labeled sites in a fraction of the time, which meant that we were helping our users in our mission to give more exposure to creatives. Our designers were happy because they got to see their designs built and put out into the world much faster. And on top of all that, we were able to do it with much less code than before, which meant that the code base became easier to understand and maintain. So although committing compiled code is considered a bad practice, for a large, complex code base with a lot of interdependencies, it actually gave us extremely clear visibility into the reach that any one change we were making was actually having. And it also meant that we had some tools that could do some grunt work for us, which meant that our designers could spend their time focusing on thinking about the design issues that really mattered, rather than doing menial tasks like stitching our sprites together. So in this case, we were able to find a balance between a subpar technical implementation with overwhelming developer and designer happiness, as well as code health by reducing a lot of our CSS technical debt and increasing our development speed. But what happens when you need a tool that doesn't seem to exist yet? It was around this time when we started working on a new product, which was a single-page web app for task management that we called Action Method Online. Being that it was a brand new product that we were starting from scratch, we had a rare and excellent opportunity to try out new technologies without having to worry about trying to fit anything into any existing code or existing paradigms. So we stuck with Sass for the CSS, but on the JavaScript side, we actually decided to look into implementing a JavaScript framework into one of our products for the first time ever. So we started building this product in 2011 at a time when actual JavaScript frameworks, as opposed to just like libraries or utilities, were kind of just starting to pop up and really take hold. So Behance at this point was already a really large code base that wasn't using a JavaScript framework. And although we tended to carry over our tools and knowledge from Behance onto any of our new work, the nature of a single-page task management web application was just so vastly different from the traditional static content display of Behance that we recognized the need for a framework in a way that we never had before. But if you look at the timeline, we were doing this at a time when there weren't really that many options out there, and the ones that were gaining the most traction were still pretty new. Now, adopting young technology in a product that you anticipate or hope is going to live on for many years can be kind of a risky move. So we started prototyping this app using the available frameworks, and what we ended up deciding was that they didn't really fit the needs that we had, which meant that we actually ended up deciding to write our own JavaScript framework, which we called nbd.js, which we claimed meant no big deal, just saying, because no tech project is complete without a fun name. And we also intended to open source it after we had stabilized it on our own product. Now, not saying that writing your own framework or using an existing one is better or worse than the other, but for the size of our team and the needs of our product, being able to iterate on our own front-end framework was actually precisely what we needed at the time. And what ended up happening was that Action Method Online became a really good proving ground for this NBD framework. Because it was born and forged for these specific interactive and data-driven purposes, you could create tasks in a modal, you could upload files, you can drag and drop things everywhere around. We were able to prove the framework's worthiness in an actual real-world setting. And what we ended up with was a lightweight but robust MVC framework that worked great not only for this application, but we were able to start using it back over on Behance for the more complex features that we were starting to build over there. So back on Behance side of things, by this time, Behance was evolving from its static desktop website roots to finally become responsive. Now, executing this kind of huge paradigm shift was actually a really big undertaking for us. Nothing about how the site was built up to this point was conducive to being responsive. The way we built the layout was completely rigid. The existing design wasn't immediately adaptable to smaller screens. And we were absolutely lacking the front-end tools that we needed to cleanly structure and implement the kind of responsive functionality that we wanted to build. So now we were faced with a unique challenge. Whereas previous updates weren't fundamentally structurally different, both from a design and a code perspective, this one introduced really massive visual, functional, and structural changes. So the time came for us to decide, does this massive change warrant a full rewrite from scratch, or should we do this upgrade incrementally? Now, I think your first reaction to viewing a new design is to look at your existing product and think, oh, the new design is so nice and clean and simplified. We've built a way harder, messier version of that before. We've learned all of our lessons. We can do it way better the second time around. But this is actually where survivorship bias comes into play. It can actually lead us to forget or just ignore our past failures. Your working product is the result of overcoming trial and error and failures. And by throwing away the code that taught us those lessons in the first place, we're pretty likely to simply just rediscover the same or at least similar problems as before, which ultimately is going to defeat any of the idealistic dreams that we were having about launching quicker by starting from scratch anyway. So, despite all the challenges in place by the existing foundation, we knew a full rewrite was out of the question and an incremental upgrade was going to suit us and the product and our users much better. So with this in mind, we started work on our first ever pattern library and style guide with the intention that these modular components would help us in our endeavor to update the website to be responsive in smaller pieces and get things out the door quicker. We built them at the time using Mustache, Sass, our NBD JavaScript framework, and we were using Require.js for our modular JavaScript loading. And as we updated individual pages of the website to fit the new responsive design, we would just replace our old UI components with these new ones that we had built with the pattern library. And for some time, what that meant was that we had something that looked kind of like this. We had these super old, long-standing sections of the website that were surrounded by these bright, new, shiny, responsive sections that we'd been updating. And not only that, but actually if you were browsing the website on a small device, you could end up with two vastly different experiences, sometimes seeing a page that was optimized to fit your smaller screen, and sometimes landing on an extremely unwieldy desktop-optimized page. Now, once again, I doubt that you would ever find an article suggesting that having some of your pages be responsive and some of them not responsive is a good user experience. But what we did was we prioritized upgrading our highest traffic pages first, so hopefully you were less likely to experience any weird scenarios. And if nothing else, to the best of my knowledge, we didn't upset or scare away any of our users by having a slightly non-ideal implementation along the way. So these tools and best practices carried us well into about 2015. All the while, we were working on Behance to make it responsive, when we started work on another brand new single-page web app, this time a website builder called Adobe Portfolio, which stood to be the most complex web application that we'd built to date. So we wanted to build a full what you see is what you get website editor, where you could use a graphical user interface to customize and change your website and see everything reflected in the editor in real time without writing any code, all while maintaining the editor interface that needed to not interfere or intersect with the user's customizations in any way. So we started building Portfolio with the same tools that we had been using on Behance, but building and maintaining your own tools is not without its risks and downsides either. And by now, we'd been starting to feel some of the growing pains of using our own homegrown JavaScript framework. So NBD was originally built by one of our developers and maintained by only a couple more, which meant that it didn't move particularly fast. So other open source JavaScript frameworks were advancing at a much higher rate, which meant that we were not only missing out on the benefits that these advancements could give our products, but we would be losing time if we had tried to implement the same or similar features into our own framework. It also meant that it was much more challenging for new hires to learn it. Not only is it sort of hard to entice people to work on a custom framework, but once they're there, documentation was sparse because the developers who knew the framework were mostly busy working on the framework or building features for our products rather than writing documentation. But it also meant that the universe of resources to get help from was scoped entirely to a very small portion of our dev team, which of course then made it much harder to be self-sufficient if you were trying to learn this framework for the first time. On the flip side, popular open source frameworks come with the benefit of much more active and visible communities to tap into for help, which not only means that you have a way bigger pool of resources to get help from, but it also means that there's a community to give back to when you solve a particular challenge yourself. So by then, it was easy to acknowledge that our homegrown tools were no longer the best ones for our team or for the types of products and features that we were building. Now, they had worked for us for a long time, and in some ways they still were. There's no one singular moment where something becomes completely wrong for everything you are and have ever done. So up to this point, we'd done well adopting modular JavaScript with NBD and require.js. We'd done the best we could scoping and componentizing our CSS as much as possible using the BEM methodology and some Sass features. But as our websites and apps were becoming increasingly complex, the truly scoped nature of CSS in JS tools and frameworks were becoming impossibly enticing. And as our products evolved and our needs advanced, our current tools were simply becoming too outdated to serve us best anymore. So we had sort of an interesting perfect storm of timing for our team. After we had spent some time focused on Adobe Portfolio's development, we split some of the team back and gave some attention to Behance. We'd been feeling the need for this advanced tech on Portfolio, and in the time that we'd been building it, our designers had been working on a whole new look and feel for the entire Behance website. And we wanted it to make a big splash. We wanted a release to the world that would change the look of pretty much every single page on the website all at once, but once again, without starting everything over from scratch. And as an additional challenge, this time around, it was actually even more of a widespread update. Whereas we were updating individual pages or groups of pages the first time around, this time were we not only going to change the look of the components that were being used across the site, but we wanted to change the fundamental underlying code away from our homegrown tools, and we wanted the whole site to get the benefit of this upgrade all at once. So, with a big overhaul on our plates and a technical need to fill on Portfolio, the time was once again ripe to look towards new technology. Now, in the same way that the industry at large has opinions on the best tools to use, so does any given dev team. So what we did was we held group discussions, lunch and learns, knowledge sharing sessions for anyone who was interested on the team, where we would discuss the pros and cons of literally every different JavaScript framework and scoped CSS solution under the sun. And what we would do is we would actually try out the best candidates on the admin section of our website, which is just part of the website that only employees could access. But it gave us a means of getting a pretty near real-world proving ground for these different tools. Ultimately, we decided on Vue and CSS modules as our preferred tools, both for Behance and Portfolio. But by now, this story probably sounds pretty familiar. We've come full circle on needing new tools, investigating new tools, choosing the new tools, and then actually implementing them. And although the specific technical implementation details may differ, the ideas and methods that we use to get the job done are pretty much the same. We exclusively build new features using these new tools and frameworks, which means that we can start using them immediately. We rebuilt our existing UI components using these new tools alongside their existing implementations, which we could then just put into use as the site was updated. And perhaps most critically, we did all of this behind feature flags, which is just a check in the code that serves one set of code or another depending on a user's gatekeeper setting, which meant that we could build all of this code alongside the existing website without interfering with what was already there, while also still having the ability to see all this new stuff in action, in production, before it was actually ready for its public debut. And that actually brings us to where we are today. The website isn't fully converted, but we continue to follow the same practices as we update and develop new features. And as an aside, although we are somewhat recently into our transition into Vue, we actually have already switched to React on Portfolio and may also do so at some point on Behance. And I bring this up just to illustrate a different point than any I've been able to make yet, which is just that depending on your situation, sometimes the decisions are kind of bigger than just you or your team. So for us at Adobe, there's a bigger movement to get the web teams on the same framework, just so we operate in less isolation and can knowledge share across teams more easily, which is a pretty worthwhile endeavor to have. So if you look at the arc of front-end development on Behance over the last 8 years, it has changed drastically. In 2010, our biggest concerns were around perfecting the slickest looking gradient or finding the best carousel jQuery plugin. But by 2018, not only are we concerned with how the website looks, but we also have to think about how to optimize our code for the least repetition, how to get the best performance, how to handle complex data and state management, all while making it function in more browsers and devices than ever before. And since the CSS has become more closely intertwined with the JavaScript and the markup in modern frameworks than ever before, our concerns are no longer isolated to the CSS or the JavaScript independently. And because these CSS and JavaScript languages and frameworks move so fast as well, we end up having a much bigger and more robust ecosystem that we need to have a deep understanding of. Front-end development is hard, but I encourage empathy in your decision-making and interactions around it, because every technical choice is relative, and there's no one right or best way to build a website. So in case the examples so far didn't illustrate the beautiful, messy path web development can take, I will super quickly air a little bit of our Behance dirty laundry. So if you've ever felt bad about skeletons in your code closet, hopefully this will make you feel like you're not alone. So the framework I said we're not using anymore, we still use it on some parts of the site. We're still using 3 different template rendering engines across the site, which is just a relic of transitions over time. This just happens to be the first page you see when you log into the website. If you scroll down that page a little bit, you might notice these 2 buttons that look identical. They're not sharing a single line of code. Yet, they'll get there. One is just written in Vue. I decided to look up some of our to-dos. This is in the head of one of our sections of our site. It says there's a lot of stuff included here that's just unnecessary, which sounds pretty bad. So I wanted to see how long that had been there. So how about our CSS? This is a good one. It says to do. This is a temporary fix. I love a good, just like fat Z index blindly applied. But it's temporary, so no big deal. There's a page that we never made responsive. It does get traffic, but we just never got around to it. And my personal favorite, if you recall, I said we were committing our compiled CSS back in 2011. Well, we did that for over 5 years, way long after plenty of other viable solutions had become available. Sometimes it just takes a while to be able to repay your technical debt. So if it sounds like I'm saying our website is kind of messy and imperfect, good. That is exactly what I'm saying. But ultimately, I'm proud to say that I work on Behance. Even now that you all know how the sausage is made, it's not perfect. But the difference between not perfect and bad is all in how much you focus on it. The closer you examine something, the worse it seems. But everything that we've built is the result of hard work and smart ideas and really good teamwork. And I feel lucky to work with a driven and compassionate group of people who care deeply about the work that they create, the product that they're building, and the impact that it has on the lives of the people who use it. And ultimately, these are the values that I think make our industry really what it is and are way more important than any latest framework or pristine or perfect code base. Thank you.